Hey everybody, welcome back to another reasonable price prediction, the series where we try to figure out where your favorite altcoins could be headed. Now today we are back with Solana, and with this video I wanted to take a more macro general approach. So I kind of wanted to talk about not only Solana but the crypto space in general. We will of course be focusing on Solana the most out of any other altcoin we talk about, and Solana will be the example I use for altcoins, but I want to talk about mainly the possibility of us currently being in a left translated cycle. And what that means is there's a lot of talk at the moment about us currently being in a bull run, when during other cycles we would have to wait a lot longer to get into a bull run like this. And Solana is a good example, kind of shows off this case a lot, because if we take a look at how far Solana's moved in the last, months, basically year, close to a full year, we can see the gains have been sublime, crazy. And many would argue you wouldn't see these gains outside of a bull run, and it is definitely a valid argument. No asset rallies 14x in a bear market anyway, unless it's a short position. But beside the point, basically we've seen great price action over the crypto space in general. Bitcoin has done well, not only this last year, but in the last few months, broken past its all-time high. There are a lot of bullish signs, and people are excited. So today we're going to be talking about where we kind of most likely are, and if we can even figure that out, or if we're in something completely new, because we are sort of in something completely new. So just to make sure we're on the same page, before I go into the current predicament that we're in, I'm going to set a very basic understanding of what happens usually during a cycle. Now this is the most basic I could put it, but more or less after the halving, you usually have a time period of half a year, give or take, where we have quite volatile price movement. And as you can see here, Solana obviously rallies a good bit, then to have a strong pull down. And the key thing here is that over the cycles, we've seen this with Bitcoin, we've seen this with other assets during other cycles. Usually over these months, the asset doesn't stray too far. It usually returns close to the price at which it passed the halving. Now it's usually above that, because there is often the idea that the price generally trends up after the halving. So if you buy before the halving, if you wait a year, most likely the odds suggest that you are going to be green. You're going to be in the money. But anyway, we have this time frame where it's extreme volatility, but really nothing gets done too much. Money can be made and money can be lost. And then we kind of have our bull run phase, where close to half a year after that, we get about usually less than a year of just basically crazy green price action. And our 2021 was one of the most extreme examples of this over the crypto space, where basically everything went up. If it was crypto, it was doing at least like a 4x, you know what I mean? And so that puts us from December to basically November, basically a year. And then once the highs are in, we usually have what is called the bear market, where we have a long period of sell-off. And this is usually longer than the bull run, usually. This cycle's bear run has been longer than usual as well. And you could argue that we were in a bear run basically up until September of here, when we had this reversal. Just because the lows were here, it doesn't mean that was the end of the bear run. Prices still were generally trending down, and you can kind of draw a line like this to show this off, constantly getting rejected. It was trending down up until September. So again, I'm trying to make this as basic as possible, just to illustrate the patterns of the cycle. We have volatility, bull run, bear run, and then we go back into volatility. So now if we take a look at what's happened here, usually we don't get a rally like this into the halving, especially not one that brings us close to all-time highs. Now it's not impossible. Things have happened before like this with altcoins, but Bitcoin has never put in an all-time high before its halving. It's always been afterwards. And so naturally altcoins, especially the most popular ones, have experienced these booms alongside with Bitcoin. Solana being one of the most notorious for this. And so naturally there's been a lot of talk about, is this cycle different? And while every cycle is different, what they mean is, are we in a left translation? And my current opinion is yes and no, but I think no, because usually with a cycle what we have is we have usually two bull runs. We have our main bull run, so we have our one where we put in 50x's, 40x's, and then after our bear run we usually have a smaller bull run where we put in a few 5, 6x's, but then usually return to these lows. And you'll notice before how I said this this cycle has been much longer than others. And what my theory is that instead of, like usual, we have our bull run for a year, we have our bear run for a year, we have our bull run, our smaller one for 6 months, we have our bear run for 6 months, and then we trade sideways into the halving. I think what's happened is this smaller bull run has been delayed so long that it's almost merging with the big bull run that we were expecting. So this price movement here is not equivalent to this guy, but sadly Solana doesn't have enough data. But for example, in 2019, there was a smaller bull run. And I think it is equivalent to that, but that's been right translated. So that's been delayed. So instead of it happening in mid 2023, and us coming down January of this year, probably around now, when we returning to these lows, we've instead only started the move up in September. So what does that mean for Solana moving forward? It could mean two things. Usually when we have these smaller bull runs, there is a serious price correction soon afterwards. And we could see the altcoin space and Bitcoin and the rest of them drop a significant amount. We could see Solana return to kind of a $100 range. We could see it drop further. In the past, I mean, if we take this as an example, even though it's not really, Solana dropped 80% from its high to its low. And if we take this as the current high and move it 80%, we are returning basically to a $40 Solana, which seems unfathomable at the moment. But I do like to remind people that the crypto space can move up just as quickly as it moves down. So that is for sure a possibility. Another thing is that we see this bowl. We saw a bowl play out during the last halving. We could just be seeing something similar again happen, where we have a bowl and we continue our rally up. And this again is a possibility where we are now over the halving. If it's going to take us the same amount of time for us to get to the bull run where we've historically had it, which is somewhere in and around 6 to 8 months after the halving, historically that's when it starts, then we've got plenty of time to have a correction, like we said before, down to 100 and then back up. Maybe we don't drop as harsh, maybe we go to 100 and then keep rallying up. Maybe we just, again, see a rally like this and then drop to where we are now currently. It could play out in either of these ways, and it's kind of, I don't want to say you should rely on your gut feeling, but you should take the one that you think is most realistic and try not to be infatuated with the idea of these gains and take a realistic approach. I'm sure Solana will continue to do well in the long term. If you hold Solana for 5 years, I'm sure you'll make a lot of money. But if you're here to try sell close to the top and buy sometime at a cheaper price, you have to be very realistic. So for me, I think we will probably see some sort of a correction. That's just me. There's another talk that kind of here is where we started our bull run, not soon after our lows. I don't think this is correct, and that's just because usually when we put in a low, there's usually about a year and a year and a half, again basically up until the halving, where the crypto space, altcoins, Bitcoin do nothing. They kind of trade sideways. They go up a bit, they go down a bit. They usually have their mini bull run, but the mini bear run brings them back to this low. So I don't think our major bull run, our altcoin season, started here, but if it had, you would basically be out of time. And that would coincide pretty well with what's happened. We can see we've had our 44 weeks, similar to last cycle where we had these 44 weeks of green, just straight up green with a few little consolidations. We could argue that this guy here was the same as this here. And then our last few weeks of a leg up, only to have our capitulation down. And that's what we'd currently be in now. Again, there's a good case to be made for both. It's pretty compelling. We've had much worse gains. I mean, if we take a look at what we got here, we got somewhere in the range of 25,000% moves, whereas here we're only 1,400. And I say only 1,500, so you're not even getting a tenth of what we got last bull run, if this is our bull run. So again, valid points. We also saw this sort of just majority of green, where if we take a look here where we started at this green week up until this green week where we just more or less had only green. It's a similar time frame to what we saw here. We had 16 weeks of basically the same thing of only green. Now we had a couple more red candles here than we did here, and this was a longer period of time. So it could just suggest it was just a nice rally that we experienced and not necessarily equal to this. To be honest with you, I hope it's not, because if it is, it's been a pretty shit bull run. And now I'm not saying you couldn't make money. A lot of money was made here. But compared to what we've had before, for crypto, this is not great. So my opinion and hopes, I am biased. I do hope for this. But I think this is our smaller bull run that we're experiencing, and it's been delayed. And then whether that means we just go straight into our major bull run, which would usually happen in 8 to 10 months from now, or we have a correction and we spend those 8 to 10 months correcting, consolidating, distributing again, only for us to have another takeoff. I don't know. I think all of these options, to be honest with you, are likely possibilities. And it's up to you to decide which ones you want to hedge against. So moving to the Bitcoin pair, what's funny is these charts look extremely similar. And that's quite a bullish thing because it shows Solana is keeping competitive with Bitcoin. And while you expect altcoins to generally gain value against US dollar, because the US dollar is a fiat currency that is again losing value as time goes on, as more of it is created, you'd expect an asset that is finite like Solana to gain value, to also gain value against Bitcoin, another finite asset, which is arguably the king of the crypto space, is very bullish. Now, it still, dropped pretty drastically from the peak to the low. You're talking about a 90% move down, which is something no investor wants to see. But it's basically back to those highs, more or less. Again, a bit lower than we are on the US dollar pair. We've still got a basically 50-60% move before we get to the peaks of where we were on the Bitcoin pair. But I think that's a matter of when, not if, in my opinion. Again, during the halving, we had a sort of bowl formation, this arc play out last cycle, and we're kind of maybe seeing something similar play out. We've had a strong move to the green side like we did here, followed by a few weeks of poor price action. Again, we've had 4 weeks of poor price action. It might be better off to move it to something like that. That could be more realistic. Again, here after 4 weeks, we'd put in our low. We've currently had a couple more than 4 weeks, so this could be our low. If we are going to follow this pattern and have a rally up, I think this type of a move is likely. I think we will probably see a bit of an explosion in altcoins, only to see it be taken back by Bitcoin, because this happens with most altcoins during most halvings. If you go back against Litecoin, Monero, XRP, all these OG coins, you'll see that after the halving on their Bitcoin pairs, there's a bit of a there's this move basically. You have an upside down V basically. And then once we return to these lows, that's when our bull run usually takes place. So again, if you were to look for something like this on Solana, you would hope for a rally here. This sort of basin can slingshot us up. Basin slingshot us up. We put in a high. Maybe that's at the all-time high for Solana. So 47,000 Satoshis. We have a retracement back to where we crossed the halving. You'll see if we zoom in last time, back where we crossed the halving was basically at the low. We return to that low, and then it's altcoin season. So then you would go, okay, it's time for me to move out of Bitcoin into my altcoins, like Solana, like Avalanche, like Cardano, Chainlink, whatever you want to move into. That historically has been a pretty good way of determining when you should move out of Bitcoin into altcoins, if you want to take that risk. Because Bitcoin will still perform well over this time period. But again, this is the Bitcoin pair. You can see just how drastically it gets outperformed by the big players that cycle, because these will change. And while Solana is kind of positioned to be a big player this cycle, there will be other alts that performed well last cycle. Things like Cardano, maybe Filecoin that were big then, but just aren't big now. So yeah, just something to be aware of. Again, if you want to take this bull run's already happened narrative, you can see that we would basically be at the end of this time frame. And again, it would kind of paint a similar picture of kind of 37 to 40 weeks of strong move from the low, 37 to 40 weeks of strong moves from the low, then to have a consolidation at the top, which is what we could be seeing here, only to then have our bear run. Again, a likely possibility. I am more leaning towards this is our mini bull run that we often get, and it's just been translated, and potentially mushed into one with our main bull run. But either way, if it's going to return to how it usually plays out, we have a while before we should enter that bull run. So until then, the price will fluctuate, but ultimately it shouldn't go much lower than what it's at now. And again, there's kind of an old saying, if you buy a cryptocurrency before the halving or at the halving, hold it for a year and a half and sell, you're usually going to be in the money. Again, sadly with Solana, I can't illustrate this further with previous cycles, but you can see if you basically want to go from the halving to the peak, you're looking at 69 weeks, funny number, but that averages out to a year and a quarter. And if you want to go from there, say another 14 weeks to kind of get your year and a half, you're going to be at here. And if you sell during that week, you're selling your Solana at a pretty good high. If we go 13th of December and check what price you would have been at, again, you'd be selling your Solana for about 180. Not the top, but also a pretty respectable price if you bought it at the halving for less than $1. So you'd definitely be in the money. That is no way a foolproof method. Things can go wrong. You can have, again, much quicker bull runs. You can have much longer bull runs. Anything can happen. This is crypto. You should hedge either ways. And as we've seen this cycle, stuff can just not play out how it has done before. Over a decade's worth of data, things can just change. So just something to be aware of. I think I've rambled on for long enough. Hopefully you found this video interesting. If you did, leave a like. If you didn't, leave a dislike. Let me know how I can improve down in the comments. Again, thanks so much for watching. Take care and peace.